Good day, everyone. When I did the service for the Kia Sportage, I promised there will be a dedicated film for the diesel fuel filter, and now it's time for me to honor my promise. So here is the filter that we will be using, made by Male. The servicing interval for the diesel fuel filter as per the Kia manual is 4 years or 60,000 kilometers. We're exactly at this point right now because this car had its last diesel filter changed at 93,000 kilometers about 2.5 years ago, and right now it's at 152 something kilometers, so we're spot on where we need to be with regards to mileage. And with that said, let's get to work. Now, each and every car has its peculiar features, some more annoying than others. In the case of the Opel, the most annoying thing I could find was the placement of the cabin filter. And in the case of the Sportage, it is the placement of the diesel fuel filter, because as you can see, it's all the way back there. And you can obviously tell that in order to access it, we have to start removing a number of components, starting with the battery, the ECU, and several other things as needed. And for the battery, begin with the negative terminal. It's held in place with a 10mm hex nut. Oh, and by the way, before removing the battery, best double check that the doors are unlocked, for the sake of convenience at least. Remove the terminal, place it to one side. Next, the positive terminal, same story. Place this one to one side as well, as best you can. And to remove the battery, you also need to remove this 12mm hex bolt that is placed down here, which holds the battery bracket in place. Here's the bolt, and let's see if I can access the bracket. Yep, I can. Place the bolt in the bracket to make sure you don't lose it. My neighbor's chickens appear to be very vocal today. And I'm able to wiggle the battery, which means that I can now take it out. The battery is out, the battery cover is out. And now we need to remove the ECU and its support, which is held in place with two bolts down there and one over here. You can see, actually that's a nut, sorry. But before I do all that, I want to spend some time to clean this up, because it's pretty dirty and I don't like it too much. Alright, all cleaned up. And now I can proceed with the removal. The nut and bolts are all 12mm hexes. Let's start with the nut. Okay, that's coming out nicely. And the bolts, I guess that's one. Slackened. This should be number 2. Slackened as well. After removing the 2 bolts and the nut, the ECU support can be jiggled. But before removing that one, you need to disconnect it. It has these 2 connectors here, one here and one over there. You need to press on this plastic tab, like so. And that's disconnected. And the same on the left side. Won't lie to you, it's a bit tricky to do this as I'm filming. Yeah, I might need to use the tip of a screwdriver here. But anyways, you got the idea. I'll do that and be right back. And a quick note, these plastic lips need to be pushed all the way 90 degrees before you're able to remove the connector, otherwise it won't really budge from its spot. And that's it, the two connectors are out. And now I should be able to gently remove the ECU, like that, and store it somewhere safe. You don't want this thing to get damaged in any way. Now let's take a look at what we have. The filter is inside this black housing, which is held in place here to the side with 3 nuts. And it has 2 fuel lines connected, and the arrows on the head identify which is which. So this is the one feeding fuel into the filter. This line is coming from the tank, as well as the return line from the high pressure fuel pump. And this is the line that goes from the filter, so this provides filtered fuel to the high pressure fuel pump and the common rail line. There are also several electrical connectors that need to be removed. One is here, one is there, and if I remember correctly, there's supposed to be a third one at the bottom, which is the sensor that measures the amount of water in the fuel. So let's tackle the 3 retaining nuts first and pull the filter and the filter housing a bit towards us so that we have more room to remove all the connectors. And these are all 10 mil. Yeah, definitely struggle with space here. Okay, and that's the first nut. And I'll remove the other 2 offline and then get back to you. And with the nuts removed, the filter housing can be gently wiggled out and pulled towards you so that you have more access to remove all the connectors and pipes. And this is the first connector to remove. You just need to press on this plastic lip here and pull towards you, which is easier said than done, honestly, because I did struggle a bit to pull it out, but it comes out eventually, no tools required. And with that out, you can actually pull these to one side to get better access. Now for the blue connector, it has a plastic lip underneath, which you can raise up with a screwdriver and then pull this one out as well. And here's what I mean. There's a lip underneath, not sure if you can see it, and you need to pull it down with the screwdriver and then at the same time pull on the connector, and then it should come out as well, like that. So 2 down, and now we need to tackle the fuel lines. At this point, I strongly recommend getting a rag or something and stuffing it underneath the 2 fuel lines, because once you do disconnect them, there may be a chance of diesel fuel spilling out, and you really don't want that thing to drip on the engine components and smelling burnt or something when you drive the car. And with regards to actually removing them, take a look at this one. You see it has this green plastic lip, and so does this one, but it's probably at the back. And what you're supposed to do, let's see if I can show it on camera, you're supposed to press this plastic lip and simply pull on the tube. Obviously it doesn't really want to come out when I'm filming, so I will remove it off camera. And with some effort I managed to yank one out. And okay, So no fuel's coming out from it, that's good. And the second one is giving me some trouble. I've pulled the filter housing a bit towards the outside to get better access to the clip. See, so it's just like the other one. And let's hope that makes it easier to remove. And wouldn't you know it, it did. Now it's out. I'm gonna use the rag which slipped earlier. So that's done. Now I'm gonna cover the two fuel lines with some tape to make sure that there's no dirt or whatnot ingress. I'm also gonna do a bit of cleanup at the tip because there is some dirt, especially on this one which feeds directly to the high pressure fuel pump. And after that we can take this out. So here are the two fuel lines covered as I said, and here is the fuel casing together with the fuel filter inside. And I got this plastic jar to catch all of the diesel fuel inside the filter. And very importantly, when you work on this, make sure to always keep it upright, otherwise you'll start getting fuel seeping out from these two lines. And for convenience, you can just start by draining as much as you can from the top lines. Because there is some fuel inside. All right. And in order to be able to remove the sensor at the bottom, first of all, you want to remove its connector at the top. Otherwise, you risk twisting the cable too much. And this needs a Phillips head. And a quick reminder why screws should always be tightened as much as they need and not more. I actually struggled quite a bit to untighten this little thing. I ended up having to use my impact screwdriver because it was over tightened. But anyways, now I'm able to remove it. Store it safely. Over here. And now I can remove this, which finally allows me to continue unscrewing this sensor at the bottom, which I should definitely do on top of my glass jar to catch any remaining diesel fuel. Yeah, I'll have to get that thing cleaned up. Anyways, see how much fuel there actually was in the filter. And you do need to drain all of this before you're able to remove the filter from its housing. Next, we need to put the filter casing in a vise and remove these two 12mm nuts to gain more access to the filter itself. I've already slackened them before. And they should come out fairly easily. And with the two nuts removed, the filter and its head should just come out, just like that. I'm gonna drain if there are any more drops of fuel inside further, and then finally I'm able to extract the old filter. At this point you should normally be able to remove the filter by hand because it's supposed to be tightened by hand, but if it's overly tightened, as is my case, I have this filter removal tool that also works on the diesel filter. And as you can see, I'm using it together with the ratchet to remove it with ease. And with the filter removed, there are two aspects that you need to pay close attention to. Number one, see the small O-ring? If your new filter comes with this O-ring, replace it. If not, just make sure you don't lose this one, which appears to be in good shape. Number two, on the filter, you should have this O-ring here, and you must make absolutely sure that it stays on the filter and not on the filter head, this one, because if it remains on the filter head and you then install a new filter with an additional new O-ring, you'll do what's called a double seal or a double gasket, and that will 100% leak. In our case, all is well. The small O-ring is in place. The large O-ring is in place. So we're good to swap the filter. With the new filter, you start by verifying that it has its own brand new gasket at the top, just like the old one has its own. And then the next thing you do, if the new filter is not genuine, you verify that it has the same shape and size as the old one. In our case, it does. And then before installing it, just grab a little bit of fuel, not oil, fuel, and just slightly lubricate the new gasket. I don't recommend using oil in this case because there is a risk of oil mixing it with some fuel, and then you're gonna push that little bit amount of oil through the fuel pump and injectors, and there is a risk of issues. So just use the same kind of fuel that the filter is supposed to filter and you should be good. And after lubricating the O-ring, screw the new filter onto the filter head. Oh, and before I forget, you know that for these kinds of filters and similarly shaped oil filters, there's the habit of pouring oil inside the filter before installing it, or in this case, pouring fuel inside the filter before installing it. I definitely do not recommend doing that, because if you pour fuel through this hole, this is actually the hole where the cleaned filter is supposed to be pushed towards the fuel pump. And the fuel that you already have, or even new fuel as a matter of fact, may have contaminants which will not get filtered. And considering that this filter will be primed anyways before starting the engine, there's absolutely no reason to pour fuel inside it. Just install it empty. Now, if the box the new filter came in also provided you with the small O-ring, replace the O-ring and lubricate it in diesel fuel as well. As I said, in our case, I'm gonna be reusing this small O-ring because I don't have a new one. And after lubricating all the O-rings, start twisting by hand until you can no longer do so. It's always fun to do these things while you're filming, that much I can say. And when you've tightened by hand as much as you can, in the case of our filter, it actually provides us with a torque setting, and I'm going to use my tool to actually torque it to the specified torque, 14 Newton meters. But in any case, 14 Newton meters means roughly hand tight. So don't go crazy screwing it in too hard, otherwise you will risk ruining the O-rings, and that will lead to leaks. So here's a question: what to do with the fuel that we have removed from the old filter? Well, if you have any use for it around the house, go ahead and use it. If not, personally, I'm just gonna put it back inside the fuel tank, because whatever is, if there are any contaminants inside the fuel, will simply get refiltered in the new filter. Just make sure there are no larger sized contaminants. In our case, there are none. So I'm just going to put it back. I just left a little bit which contains most of the dirt. That's fine. As with all car-related fluids, don't throw this down the drain, don't throw this on the ground. It's fuel and it's fairly toxic. Right. And back at the car, before reinstalling everything, I'm gonna spend a bit more time cleaning up. And I'm especially going to take a look at all of the connectors and their state, check for corrosion, check to see if anything is obviously wrong. And I'm gonna then use some contact cleaner to clean all of them just as part of preventative maintenance. And then I'm also going to take a look at the two fuel lines, and if there are any obvious contaminants at the end of the lines, I'm going to clean them as well. I'll do that off camera and come back when the cleaning is done. Fast forward a couple of minutes. I've gently reinserted the filter and its housing in its place. I'm just going to put the nuts back in for now by hand, just to make sure the filter housing doesn't go anywhere anymore. And that's one, and that's two, and let's see if I can get lucky with three. Yep, that's three. Okay, so nuts are in place. Let's go connect stuff. So, starting with the high pressure fuel pump line that comes out of the filter, push until it clicks, like so. Then the feeder line towards the filter, again push until it, see if I can give you a better angle, push until it clicks, like so. The first connector, similarly, you push until it clicks. There was a click, yeah. Second connector, again, push until it clicks, like so. Now, I'm going to tighten the three nuts by hand. Again, no torque specs for these. And then it's time to put the ECU back. Here's the ECU. I just had it covered to make sure nothing goes into the connectors. And let's see if I can slide it in place as before with one hand. It's a bit of a challenge, but nothing too complicated. Make sure it fits there. It did. Now, let's put the connectors back. Connector number one. Push it in place until it sits properly. And then raise the plastic lip until it clicks into position. Like so. Those clicks are always satisfying. And then connector number two, same story. Perfect. Now let's put the nut back here and the two bolts at the bottom. Again, I haven't found any torque specs in the manual, so tighten by hand just as before. Like so. That's one. That's two. And tighten this by hand as much as you can. And then that's three. That's it. Next, we put the battery back on along with its cover and its retaining bracket and the bracket's bolt that we also tighten by hand. Like so. And while we're at it, Go ahead and take a look at the battery connectors, check their state, look for corrosion, and maybe spend a bit of time cleaning the contacts on the battery and on the wires as well. It won't take too long. Use maybe some fine-grained sandpaper and then some battery grease to make sure that you have good electrical connections. And I'm done. The battery connectors have been cleaned, greased, properly attached. And now I'm gonna go inside the car and start priming the low pressure fuel pump so that it fills the filter. And the priming simply means that you put your contact on without starting the engine for a number of times, like 7 to 10 times. And during each of them you wait for 3, 5, 10 seconds, something like that. And if you listen carefully, you should actually hear the pump pushing fuel up to the filter. And moment of truth, let's see if she'll start. I did about 7 cycles, each of up to 10 seconds of priming. So here we go. Alright, you heard her die the first time because she probably used up what fuel was left in the lines from the filter to the high pressure fuel pump while the filter was not yet full. But then on the last attempt, the filter filled up properly, and now, as you can hear, she's running as she should, which is very, very good news. And now I'm going to check for leaks underneath the car and with the endoscope near the filter. So I let the car idle for a couple of minutes. I see no obvious leaks, but I have hooked up the endoscope right now, taking a look underneath the filter. That's just an old spot from when I first removed it. It's not a new leak, so that's fine. But now I'm actually going to take the car out for a drive for a good number of kilometers, and we're gonna take a look at the state of what's underneath the filter after I come back and see if there are any issues. And here's the status next morning. Looking beneath the fuel filter, as you can see, we have no leaks. There are no drops in fuel. As I said, those spots were there before. And the bottom of the filter looks just as we left it yesterday, so everything seems good. The car is running fine. I drove it for a couple of times, no issues, which is perfect. And it means we can now move forward. And before we jump to the conclusions, I actually want to open up the old filter and analyze it a bit. So what I want to do now is I want to cut the filter open. And for that, I'm going to use a hacksaw, not stuff like angle grinders or anything, to avoid sparks as much as possible. But I'm not terribly worried about it because this is diesel fuel, and diesel fuel doesn't ignite as easily as gasoline. It needs to be atomized, needs to be higher pressure, so I'm not worried about starting a fire or anything like that. But you know, just some basic precautions can't hurt. So I'm going to slice it open, and I'm curious to see what we're gonna get. And the moment of truth. Let's see what we get. If we open this up, we get the filter, which is pretty much also paper-based, but as far as I know, it's a special kind of paper that, for example, doesn't let water go through. That's why the bottom of the filter has this hole. This hole is for the water sensor inside the fuel. And taking a look at the state of the filter, you can see it's pretty black. Ignore the white metal shavings here. This is just from where I cut it. But let's just take a look inside. And there are various small bits of dirt and debris, which means the filter did its job as it was supposed to do. But what's interesting about it is the color. In reality, that it's actually pretty black. It appears brownish right now because of the light from the phone. But in reality, it's pretty black. And this is actually the state of a diesel fuel filter after 60,000 kilometers and 2.5 years of usage. And to be honest, I think it's not in a terribly good shape, which means that from now on, I'm actually going to change the diesel filter every 30,000 kilometers. And with that said, time to move on to the conclusions. So let's see. Number one, and what I think is among the most important things to keep in mind, has to do with all the gaskets and O-rings involved in the procedure. So each new filter comes with its own large O-ring. And as I said before, you have to make sure that the old O-ring is removed from the filter housing, that metal part, such that you never get the old O-ring on top of the new one. Otherwise, you'll get leaks. Apart from this large one, there's also a small one that insulates the shaft where the filter scrolls into. You have to make sure not to lose that one and don't let it fall. If the new filter is delivered together with a new O-ring, replace the small O-ring as well. In our case, it didn't, so we just lubricated it and put it back, but it was in pretty good shape. And the third one is the, sorry about that, is the O-ring that insulates the water sensor at the bottom, which we also didn't need to replace. But you do have to keep in mind that that O-ring, that rubber part, should stick inside the plastic housing of the sensor. And you need to double check when you actually remove the sensor from underneath the filter that it is present. And if it's not, you have to retrieve it from the filter itself. You must absolutely be sure that that O-ring is installed back as well. Second item has to do with disposal and recycling. Typically, all fuel filters should be properly recycled and not thrown away in the trash, because as I said, fuel is pretty toxic and can do a lot of damage if you throw it down the sink or on the ground and so on. So recycle this just as you normally recycle the oil and all the other filters. Number three, cost, and this will be very short. The filter itself was about 18 euros. And to have this filter replaced at the dealership would cost me about 60 euros. Okay, so about 3 times as much, roughly. And with that said, thank you very much for watching. I would be very grateful if you considered subscribing to my channel so that you're kept up to date with all the work that I do on my cars. Have a lovely day, and I will catch you all next time. Bye.